152 licenses, one winner. I asked viewers through a series of polls which licenses they would personally want to see come to Dead by Daylight. Whenever the question is asked, what licenses do people want to see, you always hear about the big names. Your Jasons, your Predators, and of course, your Five Nights at Freddy's. But I found myself asking, what other licenses would people like to see besides the big ones? Forget top 10s, what about their top 20s, top 30s, the ones people would never bring up normally but would still fork over their savings to get a piece of? So instead of a small poll, I decided to do the biggest poll Dead by Daylight had ever seen. So why did I do this? Simply, I just wanted to see the overall consensus of what Dead by Daylight players, viewers, want to see in the game. I really wanted to see which smaller licenses were wanted when the big boys were out of the way. With that personal goal, I would say that this is a success. There were so many things I learned that I wouldn't have guessed before starting this. There's also a lot of regrets, but we'll talk about them when they come up. So we know why I wanted to do this, but why did I do it this way? Why such a drawn out round of polls that definitely went on longer than expected, even by me? Why YouTube polls, all randomly generated by the most state-of-the-art polling technology? Simply put, the biggest reason is, I could just get the most people voting this way. Cut and dry, that was the most important thing with this poll. Even with all the flaws in this format, every other way would have just been worse off. If I did a full list and had people vote on them individually, like a big SurveyMonkey poll, then I would have at best maybe got a couple hundred people. Not the greatest of sample sizes. So how I'm going to do this is we're going to start at the very beginning of the poll. I'm going to work my way through the end, showing every matchup pretty quickly, but stopping to talk about specific moments, surprises, and comments at any time I feel is notable. If you're curious on the total list or the actual poll, I will have two links in the description. The first one will be the link to my community page so you can look at the whole thing from start to finish with comments included. All that will be there. I will also have another link to a Google Doc with every license listed and maybe some other information, but no promises. So anyways, let's get to the actual tournament and see who people voted for their most wanted Dead by Daylight license. So here we are with the first ever poll I did: Slenderman, Friday the 13th, Shaun of the Dead, and Tremors. There's a few things I want to talk about here besides the actual results of this. As you can see, Shaun of the Dead is in this license poll. Because when I was making this initially, it wasn't even about adding which chapter do you want to see come to Dead by Daylight. It was, what license do you want to see? Is it a cosmetic collection? Is it a killer? Is it a lone survivor? Is it something else? So you're going to notice throughout the video there's going to be a lot of licenses where what killer would they do, what survivor would they do, how does this even make sense to be a full chapter? That wasn't the intention of this poll at all. This is all just about IPs making some cameo in Dead by Daylight in some way, whether small or large. So Shaun of the Dead, for example, is a good one. You could do a cosmetic collection for it, but you wouldn't add a killer or anything. Or you could do a solo survivor. Not every license I put in here I want to come to the game. This isn't about me. I made a comprehensive list of every license I've seen in Dead by Daylight's official polls, what people have asked for. Some ones I just kind of saw around and just threw in to see if people wanted them or not. But this poll starts off really strong as you got Slenderman with 50%, Friday the 13th with 38%, and Shaun and Tremors surprisingly getting 7 and 6%. This is going to be a familiar picture here. Get used to seeing Slenderman and Friday the 13th. And it is really funny that they both started in the first polls head to head because they fight off a lot. But it's going to be interesting to see how, in the beginning of the poll, Friday the 13th did compared to Slenderman, and how that changes near the end of the tournament. And then the second poll, we have Five Nights at Freddy's, which has been confirmed for Dead by Daylight, but it is still interesting to see how wanted it really was in comparison to every other license in this tournament. I don't think anyone who is unfamiliar with wanted licenses for this game will be surprised that Five Nights at Freddy's is such a big one, but to the extent that it is voted for consistently in this tournament was staggering. People really want Five Nights at Freddy's. And the second is, it says Resident Evil, but in the actual polls it was listed as a Resident Evil 3rd chapter, because I'm also interested in seeing if people would like to revisit this same IP for a third time, and how much they would compared to any other license. Yeah, we have a lot of Resident Evil stuff. Would you want something new or something more Resident Evil that we already have? And surprisingly, a lot of people do still want Resident Evil, a third version of it. Before we move on to the second one, I do want to talk about Five Nights at Freddy's and something I saw a lot in the polls. A lot of people saying kids run these polls, kids are making these choices, and for the most part, I think it is younger people voting in these polls and playing Dead by Daylight in general. There's kind of a wake-up call some of you people need to understand. Five Nights at Freddy's is like a 10+ year old license. This is basically a decade old. The children who watched Five Nights at Freddy's and became fans are full-fledged adults having their own children right now. So you can say it's kids voting in these polls, but you need to seriously realize that time has passed. What old horror licenses were for you, like Jason, Freddy Krueger, Michael Myers, where you saw them as kids and then you grew up and you're still fans? That's happening for an entirely new generation of children. And that was creepypasta, that was mascot horror, that's Five Nights at Freddy's. It's become such a massive license from various different ages, mainly still young, I would assume. But just trying to dismiss it as kids are wanting this and kids are voting for this is just straight up wrong. You may not want it, and that's fine. Whether you think it's good or bad, these licenses, Slender Man, Freddy Fazbear, are the next generation's horror icons. These are the ones they grew up with, these are the ones they made popular. We have the third poll, Predator, no surprise, getting 83%. Brightburn, which is the kid's Superman, being 7. Shodan from System Shock getting 6%. Condemned Criminal Origins getting 5%. Predator is a massive license, even though these are very small in comparison. It's not a shock that Predator has such a huge market pull here. Candyman with 76%, Cujo with 13%, Hills Have Eyes with 6%, and The Ritual with 6%. My personal most wanted license, Bioshock, 70%, just completely dwarfing Hannibal Lecter, Little Shop of Horrors, and Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. We have The Thing, 80%, a lot of people want The Thing in the game. Cabin in the Woods, 10%, Psycho, 6%, and Sweet Home, surprisingly 4%. That's one of those licenses I've seen it, and there's some cool monster designs, so I threw it in, just to see how it would do, and doing close to Psycho is pretty interesting. And that's Terrifier with 66%, a controversial license for many reasons. I would really enjoy having Art the Clown in the game in some aspects. We have Dark Deception here, which a lot of people wanted me to add to the polls. This isn't a game I'm personally very aware of. I've seen it around in a few clips, but I think it buys into the mascot horror, which a lot of people grew up on. I'm just completely unaware. We have Leprechaun with 13%. Sorry, Warwick Davis, it's not looking good for you. And Ginger Snaps, just a movie about a teen wolf. 3% is probably better than I would have expected. And then we're showing the age of the tournament and when it started, as Chucky is 73%. And it's not that old. To be fair, when I released this poll, it was the week before Chucky was announced. It was like 4 or 5 days before Chucky was officially announced for the game that this poll went up. So no surprise, a lot of people wanted Chucky. Chucky's in the game. He's pretty great. They did a great adaptation. So let's talk about the other ones. We have Gremlins here with 16%. Gizmo, Don't Feed It After Midnight. It would be a difficult adaptation, but I do think you could do the Gremlins in some fashion. Annihilation, I only threw that in there because I like the movie. It is one of those picks I just kind of threw in to see if anyone gives a fuck. And not really. This is definitely the first shocker, I think, of the tournament for me. Basket Case only at 4%, like Annihilation beat Basket Case. I know Basket Case isn't a popular horror movie, but to be beat out by Annihilation, maybe it's people just want Natalie Portman as a survivor in the game. Scooby-Doo was 69%, surprisingly Dying Light with only 18%. Soma with 12%, and Darkness Falls, don't think about Darkness Falls. Scooby-Doo did pretty big numbers, especially since, I'm gonna kind of spoil it early, Dying Light makes it really far in the tournament. It does very well. So to see that Scooby-Doo managed to dwarf it so heavily in this first initial poll says a lot for Scooby-Doo. American Psycho 70%, Pumpkinhead 14%, Christine 8%, and Dead Silence 8%. Patrick Bateman for the memes most likely. Christine, how does a car work in Dead by Daylight? I don't know, but it would be funny to see how they would do it. And Dead Silence is about puppets, and who doesn't love puppets? We have Pennywise or It at 77%, The Fly, The Human Experiment, where man meets fly and becomes Flyman, American Horror Story with 6%, and Devour with 3%. Don't worry about Devour, I just tossed it in there to see how it would go. No surprise, Pennywise just absolutely clears anyone he comes into contact with. So here was an interesting one. Here's one of the more interesting polls. We have Coraline with 52%, and it's a license I didn't really think of much before this tournament, but the more I heard about it, the more I kind of like it, and I think it could work in some way. It's one of my favorite animated stop-motion movies, and if you haven't watched it, I would highly recommend it if you're a horror fan. That being said, compared to the other two licenses, you got the Babadook with 25%. It's not enough to beat Coraline. And kind of the first heartbreaking one is Carrie at 20%. They don't want to see the girl in red with telekinetic powers. Very big sad. And Suspiria at 2%. And another interesting one, we have A Quiet Place with 43%. It seems that a lot of people would like to see a death angel in some way, a killer based around hearing, maybe not able to hear survivors until they move, maybe even see them, would be an interesting new way to experience a killer. So maybe that's what people want. Maybe they just want Jim from The Office as a skin. Goosebumps with 34%. How would they do it? I don't know. I'm thinking of ideas, but likely a cosmetic collection. Goosebumps, surprisingly popular when it comes to wanting stuff in Dead by Daylight. Goosebumps is probably the biggest horror kids license ever that I could think of, so it's not a shock that people like Goosebumps, but voting for it in this poll was interesting, that a lot of people did ask for it. And Dishonored I kind of just threw in here because I wanted to see if people would gel with the idea of a Dishonored chapter, cosmetic collection in some form. And 14% agreed, beating Dino Crisis at 9%, so Twisted Metal with 43%, Postal 2 with 33%, Clock Tower with 17%, and Omen with 7%. A couple things to learn from here. I don't know why the Postal guy is so wanted for Dead by Daylight. It is probably the most misunderstood license for me personally, as he gets mentioned a lot, like surprisingly a lot. He's not just like a niche pick, like I hear some people bring him up in their top 3, top 5s. He's surprisingly popular for Dead by Daylight, and I don't know why. I like Postal 2, but picturing him as a killer is just one I never, really thought of, but hey, people want it. Also, that Clock Tower is 17%. There's a few people who want to see it, and the biggest thing I learned is nobody wants to see The Omen. And another poll where the license was added to the game mid-tournament, so Alan Wake is the second license removed from the tournament. So with the critical reception around people saying who Alan Wake is, like why did we add Alan Wake? If you're unaware, there was big controversy that a lot of people were hating that Alan Wake, he was a lone survivor added, and they think he didn't deserve a spot in the game. Not everyone, maybe not even majority of people, but a large portion. Like, this might be the first license I've seen in a long time that got ringed out for being an addition to Dead by Daylight. And it didn't do well here, so kind of tracks, honestly. Polls here are Cthulhu, Lovecraft, something around that mythos did 54%. A lot of people want to see it. You got Trick or Treat at 22%. It's honestly just Sam, the little guy on the poster there. People want to see Sam, the several hundred-year-old child spirit thing. But he's popular enough to beat Alan Wake and Manhunt. So yeah, just a few interesting things here. We have The Evil Within with 53%, which kind of beat The Walking Dead. How I put it in the poll is The Walking Dead TV show or the games, not separate license. I hope people didn't just assume I was talking about the Telltale version. I haven't played The Evil Within, but it seems to have a lot of devoted fans who want it in the game. So much so that it would get 53%, and it goes pretty far. There is a big want for The Evil within Dead by Daylight. Malignant at 10%, and The Fog surprisingly only getting 1% less than Malignant, which is Interesting, because fog is just pirate ghosts. That's all it is. Then we have Amnesia: The Dark Descent at 54%. I assume people just know it's like the umbrella of Amnesia. This is before the bunker came out, I believe, or around that time maybe. A very well requested license, so 54% isn't surprising. Killer Clowns with 29%. This is before the Killer Clowns game came out. And even still now, I think having a killer clown added to the game would be a pretty good addition. I think they could make a very interesting killer out of a clown, and I think other people kind of agree with this. Supernatural with 10%, probably just a survivor chapter, but still not a lot of people asking for it. And Fear with 7%. Appears that people just don't care about Alma or don't want her in the game. Outlast with 41%, Dead Space with 37%, Dark Souls or FromSoft at 17%, and Creep with 4%. Outlast is a lot more popular than I expected. It's a massive game a lot of people like, but being added to Dead by Daylight, there's a pretty large group of people who want to see Outlast in some form come to the game. Same thing with Isaac Clarke. He's my most wanted survivor to come to the game. Love the Dead Space series. A lot of people agree with that. 37%, not that shocking, not even that far off from Outlast. FromSoft Dark Souls, you could do some cosmetic collection, maybe do a killer. I think it's an interesting license to think about because it is very gothic and dark and horror-esque, but it is, you know, just an RPG game. It's popular. It could do well. And Creep is a good movie. I'd recommend it. We have the Left 4 Dead update chapter, full chapter license. This was proposed as, do you want to see Left 4 Dead, you know, make a comeback, maybe with a full chapter, like a killer, or more survivors, or more legendary skins? And a lot of people do. 63% want to see Left 4 Dead revisited, which was interesting. We have Siren Head at 28%. I just threw him in because out of all the creepypastas I've seen recently, he's an interesting killer design. I know he's big, but you can always figure something out, and a lot of people actually responded to Siren Head. Dead Island at 5%, so not looking good. Train to Busan, also not looking good at 4%. And we have Call of Duty Zombies. This is zombies in general, so like characters like Richtofen, Dempsey, maybe it's skins or cosmetic collection, a map. And with 52%, people seem to also think that would make a decent fit. At least more so than Berserk, that got 25%, Phantasm, which got 12%, and Return of the Living Dead at 12%. We have Until Dawn at 52%, which is without a doubt one of the most requested licenses to date, mainly for the survivors. A lot of great characters. If you haven't played Until Dawn or watched a playthrough of it, I would highly recommend it. It was great when it came out, and it holds up pretty well. There's actually a remake or remaster coming out soon, so if you've never experienced the series, soon would be a good time to pick it up. These are the same people who are creating the new Dead by Daylight game, the casting of Frank Stone. Unfortunately, for a few reasons, Until Dawn is basically a pipe dream. As Supermassive doesn't really have the proper rights to Until Dawn, that's PlayStation, and it doesn't seem like they're going to give it up. I doubt Behavior would want to step on their new friends, Supermassive toes, and bring in a license that doesn't really belong to them anymore. Plus, Dead by Daylight isn't going to do a Wendigo. They talked about not doing Native American spirits, killers from a culture where they might misrepresent it. So if this were ever to come to the game, it would only be a solo survivor, which would be good, but I don't think it's ever going to happen, but people do want to see it. Here we have the Universal Monsters with 26%. This is your classics, your Frankenstein, your Dracula, your Wolfman. There's some people who want to see it, maybe a cosmetic collection, you know, like Trapper Frankenstein, Wolfman Blight maybe. There is some appetite for it, and Prototype with 15%, probably be the character Alex Mercer as the killer. And then we have Love, Death, and Robots with 7%. This is an anthology show I watched, it's an animated anthology show. If you like watching a bunch of like short animated films that drastically vary in animation style, storytelling, it's just a fun ride and does surprisingly well. So there is some characters in this series that people would want to see, or maybe even just, you know, some cosmetics. We have the Terminator with 45%, and the second Stranger Things chapter, which is basically Vecna and more Stranger Things characters like Robin and Jim Hopper, is still one of the more requested ones. People really want to revisit the Stranger Things chapter. The Boys, which I tossed in because I like The Boys, it's popular. Maybe we could see a cosmetic collection at some point. And The Exorcist was 7%. I think just a lot of people don't think The Exorcist fits in Dead by Daylight very well, and since it's a child in the first one, I guess that makes sense. We have what I originally had listed on the poll as just The Shining, but later added Dr. Sleep and The Shining together. 64% of people wanted it when it was just listed as The Shining. Second option here, it's probably because all the options it went against were not great, with the Batman Rogue Gallery at 16%, League of Legends at 13%. I had it listed as just Fiddlesticks here, League of Legends Fiddlesticks, later changed it to just League, only doing 13% though. And we have Identity V with 7%. You know, that game you always hear about just being Dead by Daylight but better. In every comment section there's at least one. Enough people bring it up, so maybe they would want to do a collab. As I believe Behavior had some relationship with the people who made Identity V in helping them. There's something there, I don't know much about it, but apparently there is a connection between the Identity V devs and Behavior, so maybe a costume collection, maybe a killer, who knows. I threw it in, but no one seems to care. And we have Junji Ito with 63%. If you're unaware what Junji Ito is, it is a very famous horror manga, like probably the most famous horror manga in history. It is like an anthology series of several different like short horror stories that are very grotesque and absurd. How like themes of humanity are structured in like monsters and spiritual entities. It's hard to describe. I only put Junji Ito in the list because it was in an official Dead by Daylight poll themselves. What licenses do you want to see come to the game? Junji Ito was there, so I thought I'd add it. And there's actually a good amount of people who want this. It's not just this poll. Later on, it does pretty good. It seems to be way more popular than the Addams Family at 14%, and Hello Neighbor at 12%, and 11% for Tales of the Crypt. The comments around Hello Neighbor were hilarious, as people were just roasting it non-stop in the actual poll. People hate Hello Neighbor. So it's still got 12%, but it's probably because people are unfamiliar with the Addams Family or Junji Ito or Tales from the Crypt. So I'd assume some people know what Hello Neighbor is and might not know what the other two are. We have Jaws at 45%, The Purge at 22%, Pan's Labyrinth at 19%, and Akira, whatever you want to say, at 13%. Jaws is the sleeper pick, and I think people want to vote for it just because they want to see how you would bring a shark into the game. And I've seen quite a few fantastic concepts, and I've had a few ideas myself how you could do the famous Jaws shark in the game. I don't think it's impossible, and it would be pretty interesting to see, and other people agree. The Purge, which has a lot of very good costume design, I think people strictly are voting for this because they want to see a cosmetic collection around it. We have Pan's Labyrinth, which I see get mentioned from time to time, mainly in regards to the eye hand monster. People want to see him, and that would be pretty cool. Maybe some other stuff. It was a very popular movie when it came out, and it still has a big following. And I don't think people really want to see Akira or Kira. We have Ghostbusters with 50%. Iconic, not a shock in the slightest. Prey at 18%, Megan at 16%, Spawn at 16%. And the thing about this poll that surprised me more than anything was I learned Megan isn't really that popular. If Prey beats you out by 2%, I don't imagine a lot of people actually really want to see Megan in Dead by Daylight. It's one I hear a lot of people bringing up, but it seems like to me it's one of these licenses that is an overinflated sense of hype, that people just assume that people want it, so they always add it to their videos about it. But in the actual polls, just no one really shows up for Megan. The audience is just not there. Being below Prey and tied with Spawn does not show me that this is actually a very wanted license in the game. But it is one we could see, maybe. Little Nightmares with 42%, The Nun with 26%, Cry of Fear with 18%, and Darkest Dungeon with 14%. Little Nightmares is very popular, both in and outside of Dead by Daylight. I think there's a new game coming out, Little Nightmares 3. A lot of people like the game, and you could probably do some cool stuff. There's a lot of cool characters in the series. The Nun is second, and I hear the Nun brought up a lot. I'm gonna be honest with you, I hate the Nun. I watched that in theaters, and I was just laughing the whole time. Me and my friends were just ripping that movie apart. I like The Conjuring 1 and 2. I did not like the Nun in the slightest. If you want it, that's fine, but I don't want it. Maybe they do their own horrific Nun in the game. I don't want the licensed Nun. Just because she's a cool looking character doesn't mean I think she should be added. Cry of Fear with 18%. This is a very popular horror indie game in the like late 2000s, I believe. Very big on YouTube. There's a pretty big audience for wanting Cry of Fear. You don't really see it here because it's against Little Nightmares, but tons of comments of people wanting Cry of Fear in the game. And apparently, I don't know if this is true or not, that the license holders behind Cry of Fear and Behavior were going to do a collab, but it just never happened. And at this point, with how popular Dead by Daylight is and the licenses they are bringing to the game, I don't see Cry of Fear coming outside of maybe some costume collections. But if true, this is a missed license that was going to come to the game. And it's actually possible that this is that license that Matthew Cote talks about they had assets made of and the deal fell through. So that's possible. And then Darkest Dungeon, 14%, surprisingly high. We have Hotline Miami with 51%, Poppy Playtime with 19%, 16% for Warhammer 40k, and 14% with Tokyo Ghoul. I gotta admit bias when I think it is present. One of my bigger videos that I've made, or at least for my licensed chapters, has been Hotline Miami. So, I don't think it's surprising that the people who have some mild, tenuous connection with my channel in some way would be voting for Hotline Miami. So while I do think people do want to see it, they wouldn't have voted for it if they didn't want it, so there is a lot of people who want to see Hotline Miami. I wouldn't be surprised if the population I'm pulling from is heavily biased towards wanting Hotline Miami specifically. I just had to get that out there. Unfortunately, Warhammer 40k does not do well. That is one I want. And Tokyo Ghoul, I think just Tokyo Ghoul's run its course. I don't think people care about it much anymore. And then we come to our third license, which was removed from the poll, as it is now in the game, and that is Castlevania at 42%. Insidious with 36%, I guess some people want to see it. Magic the Gathering with 11%, and Ghostwire Tokyo with 11%. So that's not boding well for Magic the Gathering being such a massive license, being tied up with Ghostwire Tokyo, which a lot of people don't even know about. We have Doom with 49%, and I wonder if it's people saying Doom Guy would be an awesome killer for the game because there's no possible way he could be a survivor. You have the Backrooms with 27%, Portal with 18%, and Diablo with 6%. That one was a shock to me. Diablo has a lot of cool character design, so only being 6%, kinda shocking, especially when it's kinda similar to Doom, you know, with the satanic imagery, demons, but still being so dwarfed is kinda funny. You have Mortal Kombat with 54%, you have Fatal Frame with 24%, Death Stranding with 17%, and Final Fantasy with 5%. Mortal Kombat, a lot of great characters. You could do some killers. Fatal Frame is a cult classic horror series, so 24% seems about right. Death Stranding, I think a big reason 17% of people voted is because they want to see Norman Reedus come to the game, but I assume if they ever did the Walking Dead chapter, they'll probably do a Norman Reedus Daryl, so I don't imagine there would ever be a Death Stranding chapter or cosmetic collection. Final Fantasy, I don't know, there's a lot of characters, maybe somebody wanted something. I just put it in because I wanted to see, you know, some reaction. Maybe some people wanted to see it, clearly not, at 5%. Bendy and the Ink Machine at 52%, Death Note at 32%, Orphan at 9%, and Wishmaster at 7%. SCP at 82%, absolutely just destroying the other three. And that's not difficult because it's Jennifer's Body at 12%, Creepshow at 5%, and Kingdom at 1%. Kingdom did so poorly here, I just straight up removed it from the entire tournament. No one cared about it. I didn't assume anyone would care about it, but I think it would be a waste to even put it in a loser's bracket, so it was just gone. Us at 55%, Danganronpa at 24%, The Darkness at 14%, and Blood Rain at 7%. I only added Danganronpa because people were asking for it in the comments under a few of the polls, so when I asked people what they wanted to see added to the poll before the tournament was over, Danganronpa was highly requested, so I put it in. We have The Nightmare Before Christmas at 53%, we have The Dead Game Evolve Rest in Peace at 25%, Gears of War at 14%, and Twin Peaks at 8%. I feel like getting Evolve in some way wouldn't be difficult, since I don't think the license would be very expensive to bring to the game. I don't know what they would do. It seems like a decent amount of people thought it would be cool to see it come to Dead by Daylight in some way. The Last of Us at 63%, probably just for the survivors. Joel and Ellie. Reanimator at 18%, Signalis at 11%, and Split at 9%. Half-Life at 58%, surprisingly, The Strangers at 27%, Days Gone at 7%, and Darkstalkers at 7%. Just like PlayStation, it seems that the fans do not want Days Gone. We have Carnage, Venom, I threw Marvel on, but I think people are just thinking about Carnage or Venom, probably Carnage, he fits the themes more, at 67%. We have Pearl at 14%, Control at 10%, and Eternal Darkness at 8%. And that ends the first round. That was just the qualifiers, I would say, to figure out where each license needs to be placed moving forward. And now we're starting to enter elimination rounds, where licenses are completely removed from the tournament, depending on their initial placement. So the first one we're going to enter is the loser's bracket. And the loser bracket rule was only the top license in each poll will move forward, and the other three will be removed permanently. These licenses were voted for the least in their initial polls, so we don't need to waste much time, as they're probably not very wanted. But this gives it a second chance to any license that lost that maybe they were up against stronger competition to get a second chance. We have The Exorcist at 64% moving on to the next round, while Return of the Living Dead, The Ritual, and Devour are eliminated. Love, Death, and Robots surprisingly moving on to the next round at 41%, while Christine, The Omen, and Suspiria just couldn't get it done and are removed. No killer car for us. Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark at 41% moving on to the next round. Ghostwire Tokyo beating out Diablo, Days Gone, and Blood Rain for the next round contendership. And the final loser bracket poll is one we have an issue with. Initially, Twin Peaks was higher than Split when I did have to make the next round of the tournament, so Split was eliminated here, but going back to get the current percentage, Split actually got up 2%. So if I waited another few weeks, Split would have actually been ahead of Twin Peaks, but at the time, Twin Peaks was just slightly ahead, so Split was eliminated even though it has gotten more percent as time has gone on. And that is the end of the loser's bracket. These are all the licenses that were eliminated from the loser's bracket. These are the absolute worst of the worst, and these are the worst movies and games to ever exist in history. But you should watch Return of the Living Dead. Great movie, great movie, great movie. So now we are at the third place bracket. These are all licenses that were third in their initial polls, and the rules for this is only one of them will be eliminated this round, and it will be the last one, as the top three will go on to the next round of qualifiers until we eventually get to the 1v1 elimination. And Pan's Labyrinth at 13. I think I made a mistake here, as I believe Pan's Labyrinth does show up again later in the tournament. I might have not actually removed it from the tournament when it should have been eliminated here, so that's my bad. Final third place bracket with Alan Wake at 49%. This was the last poll he was included in because he was confirmed for the game not long after this went live. In this poll, instead of removing Gears of War, I just removed Alan Wake. So lucky for Gears of War, Alan Wake got added, or else it would have been eliminated. And this is the end of the qualifiers round. This is the final round before we go head-to-head in 1v1 elimination until we have our number one winner. The rules for this is the bottom two are out and the top two continue. Everyone has finally gotten their fair shot. These are the leftovers who have underperformed for the most part for most of the tournament. Their final chance before they are probably removed from the tournament, before they go up against a more popular license. Bringing us to the end of the qualifiers. These were all the licenses that were eliminated, and now we get to the actual core of the tournament. Everyone has had their time to shine. They've had several chances to make it to this point, and if they haven't, they probably didn't deserve it. But now, no more protections, no more safeguards. If you're not good enough to beat another license, you're gone. Until we have the most wanted license in Dead by Daylight. We're gonna go through the 1v1s pretty fast, around 5 seconds each. I'll stop if I have something I really need to say. There is a lot of them, so I'm trying to keep up the pace as much as possible because we've already been here for at least half an hour. So boom, we have Soma. I love Soma. Goodbye Strangers. Bioshock 91%. Take that Ghostwire Tokyo. Pennywise destroying Mortal Kombat massively. Candyman somehow not massively destroying Cabin in the Woods. 25% is still pretty good from Cabin in the Woods. So we got Fatal Frame beating Twin Peaks. The Thing beating Berserk massively again. Until Dawn beating Psycho. 19% still pretty good by Psycho. Spawn 71% to Reanimators 29, not surprising. Carnage eating Poppy Playtime. Five Nights at Freddy's just actually getting rid of Amnesia really early on. Amnesia could have got a lot further, but yeah, it is FNAF. And then you have Terrifier and Ghostbusters. Terrifier liking to sit around that 66% range. Twisted Metal only 20% more than The Nightmare Before Christmas. The Walking Dead beating Us quite a lot. Second Stranger Things chapter beating the Backrooms by around 30%. Second Left 4 Dead chapter destroying the Nun, thank God. A Batman villain is better than Death Stranding, what a shocker. See, Killer Clowns actually beating Castlevania is kind of hilarious. We just got the Castlevania chapter, and you're telling me more than 30% of people want Killer Clowns over Castlevania? Maybe it's time for a chapter. Tremors beating Dishonored. It's just a privilege that Dishonored made it this far at all. The Last of Us beating Leprechaun. Warwick Davis is crying. Outlast beating Jennifer's Body. I mean, Jennifer's Body made it here somehow. The Shining. Dr. Sleep beating Orphan. Bendy and the Ink Machine removing Prototype. Both kind of inky characters, funny enough. The Fly, the Human Experiment, beating Manhunt. Not by a lot, honestly. The Universal Monsters telling Jaws to reverse drown. Slenderman removing Dead Space really early. I hate this, because I want Isaac Clarke so bad as a survivor. Dying Light removing Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. No problem. Cry of Fear actually removing Portal. People want Cry of Fear, kind of. American Psycho removing Death Angels. People want the memes, they do. SCP removing Love, Death, and Robots. Love, Death, and Robots making it here at all is an accomplishment. Hannibal Lecter and Dark Souls 3. Yeah, and the third Resident Evil chapter beating Megan. What a shock. Cthulhu and Half-Life. The Terminator beating the Babadook. People want Arnold, they just do. Hotline Miami, still my fault. Rest in peace Gizmo and Stripe and all the other gremlins. The Boys beating Tokyo Ghoul, not a shock. Who cares about Tokyo Ghoul anymore? The Evil Within beating Doom. Really devoted Evil Within audience. Goosebumps actually getting really close with The Exorcist, surprisingly. American Horror Story beating Death Note in a kind of a shocking one for me too. Trick or Treat removing Supernatural. The Winchesters are finally gonna stay dead this time. Predator beating Scooby-Doo. Scooby-Doo could have made it so much further, but Predator, hunted them to extinction. Junji Ito beating Black Ops Zombies. Carrie beating Cujo, both Stephen King licenses. Coraline beating Prey, not a surprise. I'm surprised Prey made it here at all. Siren Head removing Dark Deception. I regret Siren Head ever being in this poll. Friday the 13th dominating The Purge. Little Nightmares removing Shaun of the Dead from the tournament. The Hills Have Eyes beating Warhammer is sad. People don't care about Warhammer, it seems. Little Shop of Horrors removing Pumpkinhead is a personal. I love that one. Malignant almost losing to Evolve is hilarious. Postal beating Danganronpa, not a great matchup. Definitely see why Postal would win. The Shining removing Venom and Carnage by a massive degree. Little Nightmares taking on The Last of Us and still cleaning them out. People want Little Nightmares. Finally, The Evil Within does not have a strong enough audience when it comes to Until Dawn. Dying Light removing The Boys, not a shock here at all. The second Left 4 Dead chapter, the full Left 4 Dead chapter, just making Fatal Frame die fatally. Malignant, an American Horror Story. People actually care about Malignant right now, apparently. Predator removing the Terminator, which is kind of a funny little matchup, huh? Slenderman removing The Hills Have Eyes, like, not a shocker. Siren Head removing The Walking Dead for the tournament. I regret Siren Head so much. Candyman removing Killer Clowns. Candyman can do well. Audrey 2, Little Shop of Horrors removing The Fly. The Thing beating Cthulhu-esque mythology-based killer. Pennywise only beating Junji Ito by 30%. Trick or Treat beating Tremors. No Underground Worms, people want candy. Goosebumps, like, taking Carrie out back and, like, curb stomping her. It's crazy that Goosebumps did that. American Psycho and Spawn. Hotline Miami beating the Universal Monsters. Once again, I'm positive this is my fault. The SCP beating the third Resident Evil chapter, which is a big shock. Terrifier removing Coraline from the thing makes a lot of sense. Friday the 13th had to just come in here and gut Bioshock in front of everyone. It sucks. Second Stranger Things chapter destroying Soma is not a surprise. Hannibal more popular than a Batman villain. Outlast beating Twisted Metal by a fair degree. Twisted Metal made it pretty far, so I'm proud of that. Five Nights at Freddy's actually just killing Cry of Fear. Bendy and the Ink Machine actually being able to take out Postal. You people love your mascot horror. Friday the 13th just gutting another person. The Thing gone because of Friday the 13th. Terrifier taking out Little Shop of Horrors. Sorry, Bendy, you could only get so far because now you have to deal with the Slender Man. American Psycho removing Siren Head, thank you so much. Hotline Miami taking out Sam from Trick or Treat. The full Left 4 Dead chapter removing Malignant by a large degree. Until Dawn beating Goosebumps. Goosebumps making it this far is crazy to me. Outlast 71% to Little Nightmares 29%. Good on it. SCP Foundation actually beating Pennywise by a pretty large margin. Predator beating Candyman by a pretty large margin, but that's not a shock. Dying Light removing Hannibal Lecter. Dying Light has made a lot of progress that you wouldn't probably expect normally. The second Stranger Things chapter actually beating The Shining / Dr. Sleep. American Psycho beating Dying Light. Terrifier beating Until Dawn. That one is honestly a shock to me. Slenderman beating Predator. Slenderman just ending Predator. Someone had to. An Outlast beating Hotline Miami. Finally, Hotline Miami falls. Surprised I made it this far. There's 3 in this poll because I was left with an odd number of licenses at this point because some were removed earlier, way earlier in the tournament, and just kind of left out an odd number. So this was the random draw, so FNAF had to take out two separate licenses with one shot, and it just so happened to be SCP and the second Stranger Things chapter. And we come to Friday the 13th, ending the full Left 4 Dead chapter. Slenderman beating Art the Clown once again by a huge margin. Friday the 13th beating Outlast by another large margin. Five Nights at Freddy's massively defeating American Psycho, which I believe brings us to the final 3. So I wanted to get the best comparison possible against these 3 licenses to really understand which one is wanted more than the other. So I put them up 1v1 against each other and then a final bracket, just the 3 of them. So let's see how they did. You got Five Nights at Freddy's, 63% to Friday the 13th's 37%. Once again showing that even though Jason is one of the most wanted characters by a large margin, that Five Nights at Freddy's is wanted that much more. And then comparison, when Jason goes up against Slenderman, he's at 58% winning. but it is pretty close. But Slenderman just losing out. And then when you go Slenderman versus Five Nights at Freddy's, Slenderman does even worse, FNAF does even better, making it pretty obvious what the top 3 are. So when we come to the final round, it makes sense. Five Nights at Freddy's at 55%, Friday the 13th at 26%, and Slenderman at 19%. These are the top 3 wanted licenses for Dead by Daylight. And it is without a doubt Five Nights at Freddy's being the most popular license. And since that is coming to Dead by Daylight, that means that Friday the 13th now takes the #1 spot for the most wanted license in the game that is not already in it. And Slenderman at number 2. And that is the end of the licensed tournament video. Very, 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 very long time waiting for this. I intended to have this out within a month of the tournament originally ending, but that didn't really pan out that way. I think more so than any video I've ever made up to this point, this is the one I had the most trouble figuring out a way I wanted to do it, where it didn't feel so crappy. Like I was either missing out on way too many details or taking way too long and overindulging in so many details. I think I found an okay balance. I'm still on the longer side for me, but it's alright. 152 licenses will do that. Apologies for the overly obnoxious delay. I've scrapped the video 2 times and got severely demotivated each time and just went on and worked on other things until I could get my focus back on how to finish this video. Unlike the other poll tournaments I've done on my channel, this one I didn't know how to properly do. All the other polls I've done on my channel, I do have a very concrete idea of how I want to do them. Since they are much smaller, I can put in the exact details I'm thinking of. So those are going to be coming up a lot quicker than this one was. I have a few to get through right now, but ultimately you shouldn't be waiting long. Maybe a week or 2 until the next one, but those of you who have been waiting for this, sticking around until you could see this fully elaborated on, I appreciate your patience with me. And that's gonna wrap it up here because we've been here way too long. So thank you all for watching. My name is Dustaroo, and I will see you all real soon. Bye-bye.